We are in Parsha Vayeishev. Now, the word Vayeishev implies settling, dwelling peacefully. And the sages say that in this Parsha, that Yaakov, after all he went through with Esav, with Lavan, he thought, and he said, Yaakov looked to live in peace and tranquility. Why did he want that peace and tranquility? So that he could serve God without physical hardships. So he could have complete focus on serving God. Now, when a righteous person like Jacob wants to live a life of integrity, he wants to see the spiritual mirrored in the physical. He wants to have his bond with God expressed in all dimensions of his life and extending into the material world. So now we've spoken about this a lot, that God wants us to bring the spiritual into the physical so that we have the godly soul and the animal soul all working together to serve God, soul into body. And that's what he wanted, to have this harmonious living, which is the aim that we all have and that will be. So much of his life had been filled with hardship. After the struggles, the confrontations with Lavan and Esav, Yaakov thought he had reached that level of awareness in himself where this kind of connection was possible. We spoke about how when he went back to see his brother, he went back home to see his brother. That was in the last Parsha, and he was ready for Messiah to come. He was ready for Mashiach. He was ready for world peace. And he was hoping that Esav had grown and that Esav was also ready. But even though he was ready, Esav wasn't ready. So after all these struggles, he thought, well, now's the time, now that he finished with Esav, now that he finished with Lavan, that he could have this connection. It's interesting that sometimes when a person's going through difficulties, it's easier to understand that all the trials come from God because we're looking for a solution. Okay, God, what are you doing? So we realize God is doing it. But when things are going well, there's a natural tendency to just enjoy them and not think about anything else. But Yaakov really thought he had gotten past that level, and he felt he was ready to appreciate the spiritual even when he was enjoying success and well-being. See, that's what it is. To always know that God is here and to always be connected with God, even when things are good, and we like that. But, as we will see, God had another plan. Now, this is something we can see in these times, what is going on. And we have to know that God has a plan. And through this plan, which will come up in this Parsha, that's what I want to talk about. What is God doing in this Parsha? He's preparing Jacob and his family for the future. So through the complexities of this Parsha that we are told about in this Parsha, the leaders of the 12 tribes, because now Yaakov, we've had Avram, then it became Isaac, Yitzchak, then it became Yaakov, and now all of Yaakov's children are the ones who are going to become the 12 patriarchs, the 12 fathers, the 12 tribes, the fathers of the 12 tribes, and they will all become Jews who go forward to serve God. But now they're going to go through tests that make them ready for the positions they're going to have in the future and for generations to come. So all of this, who are the tribes and where are they and who's going to be what, becomes decided in this Parsha. Very interesting. So God sent another trial, another test, perhaps the most serious that Jacob had faced. And he had a great love for his son Joseph. And through him, he remembered Joseph's mother, Rachel, who had passed away. So he had a special love for him. Part of the special love for him was because he could see that this was a person who could bring things to another level by being very communicative in the world. That was something that was special in Joseph. And because his brothers saw that special love, we know about the multicolored coat that his father gave just to him. Not such a good idea. But Jacob felt that that was suitable for him. And so what happened then was his brothers became jealous. As we'll see, they sold him into slavery, and he disappeared from his father's life. What was the purpose of this anguish? Ultimately, to bring him the serenity that he wanted. Now we're going to start to see something interesting, that when God is doing something, the plan is not only about what's happening. What's happening is a necessary part of bringing us through to the place he wants us to be. So as we'll see, later on we see that ultimately when Joseph was established as the viceroy of Egypt, Pharaoh sent for Jacob, and he lived 17 years in Egypt in luxury and peace of mind, teaching Torah to his sons and grandsons. But for Jacob to reach this harmony between the physical and the spiritual, he needed this one last lesson. So we don't always enjoy the lessons, do we? Because we want to get there already. So sometimes when we envision what God wants Messiah, Mashiach, who's going to come and be a descendant of King David, and is going to be, a person who rebuilds the temple and gets rid of the evil and lives a life of Torah and mitzvahs and awakens people to who we're all meant to be. So we see that's what we want. So already new, so why do we need this whole process in between? So our sages say that only when the olive is squeezed does it give forth its oil. So being squeezed is not so much fun, but this is what enabled him to merit tranquility. And in the end, his wish is fulfilled. Only after Yosef was discovered alive and well, then Yaakov lived his final 17 years of complete tranquility. So it seemed, and this is an expression, very important expression, you go down to come up. So Yaakov had to go down to come up. So even in this Torah portion, in Vayeishev, we find, so early in the Parsha, we find that, again, this is one of the things like, is that a good idea? It's like with the coat, that Yosef tells his brothers about his dreams. Remember, this month, Kislev, is the month of dreams. And he tells his brothers about the dreams he had, the gist of which was that he would rule over them in the future. And that didn't make them very happy. Like, who do you think you are? But Yosef's words, the sun, the moon, and 11 stars are bowing down to me. He has 11 brothers. And the implication is father, mother, and each of you are going to bow down to me. And Yaakov, he said this in front of everybody, including his father. And Yaakov rebuked him in front of his brothers and said that the dream was not possible, that Yosef's parents and siblings should bow down before him. And Yosef said, isn't your mother Rachel already dead? That's what he said to Yosef. But Yaakov didn't realize, Rashi says that Bilhah, one of the 4 wives of Jacob, that she was very close to Rachel. They were half sisters. And when Rachel passed away, she took her children and raised them. And so he had a mother who could bow down, not Rachel, but Bilhah. So he was saying it's impossible. But why was he giving this rebuke to Joseph? Why was he saying it's impossible? Because he didn't want his brothers to feel jealous. Even though that's what he did, and he rebuked them and said it's impossible, the sages say Yaakov knew that the dream was true and prophetic. He felt it. He felt this is a true dream. This is going to happen. And the Rebbe says, Yaakov, this is very important. Yaakov was not waiting to bow down to Yosef, but he was waiting for the time that Yosef would reign in Egypt. Why? It's very interesting that, and this is also one of these things that come up and you say, what's that all about? In one of the parshas that have to do with Abraham, that he had an experience where God said to him, we're going to make a covenant, and they made a covenant, and there was a lot of darkness that came into this picture, and this was called the covenant Ben HaBesarim, between God and Abraham, and God had said to him, your descendants will be strangers in a land that is not theirs. And Abraham didn't have any children yet. Yitzhak had not yet been born. Yaakov had not yet been born. No, what happened? Nobody did anything. And God is already saying that your children will be in a land where they will be strangers. And Yaakov knew that this had to happen because God told him this. Now, so this, it's many things that happen in our lives. We can't understand why those things happen. They're not logical. Why are they not logical? Because they come from the level above logic. They come from God. And so when God says this is going to happen, it means there's a reason for it, a godly reason that's part of the godly plan. So when Yaakov heard Yosef's dreams, he waited and looked forward to its fulfillment so that Yosef would reign. And in this way, what did it mean? He understood that they would have to go to Egypt. Abraham had already gone to Egypt, so that because of a famine, and that had prepared the way. So he knew his family would have to go to Egypt. But how is this going to happen? Who knows? And so suddenly things are starting to change. And Yaakov knew that in this way, if Yosef went first, that he would be able to descend to Egypt in a dignified way. And for many years, the Jews' time in Egypt would be peaceful, tranquil, and honorable because Yosef would be a leader. But why would Yaakov anticipate the beginning of the exile, even if it would be with honor? This is really interesting that nobody wants exile. Nobody wants what seems like the opposite of what you want. But he knew that the coming of exile was inevitable because it was part of God's plan to bring the Messiah. And ultimately, the Jews are spread to the whole world. But all of this is to bring us back to come to serve God in Israel in the Holy Land. But right now, Yaakov knew that this was the first exile and it had to happen. So he understood that the spiritual meaning of Yosef's dream showed that the Jews would be able to endure the concealment of godliness that would be part of the Egyptian exile. Because in the dreams, we see that Yosef stands straight and everyone else bows down to him. In other words, he's not knocked down by the exile. He's a leader, and everyone sees that, his royalty. So Yaakov understood that Yosef's dreams meant that he would succeed in the upcoming tests. But why would Yaakov, what it says, await and look forward to exile? So actually, Yaakov was awaiting and looking forward to the complete redemption, the Geula Shlema, the redemption of the Jews from exile forever, to the completion of all the exiles until they would be taken out and freed completely. So when we want the return of the people in captivity, we want something even bigger. We want that everyone should come together to do the service that we need to do. So this parsha is really a lot about having a bigger picture. So Yosef was a shepherd like his brothers, but they were detached and removed from the world. because they were careful that their divine service wouldn't be disturbed. So this is, this kind of shepherd who wants to focus on the work of serving God. This is very important. But Yosef was a different kind of person. Yes, he could also be a shepherd, but he was able to relate to the world. He was the only one at that time who could relate to the world. He just had that ability. And later, he also became a shepherd to his brothers because he supported and sustained them in the days of famine. So he took care of them like sheep, took care of all the people of Egypt, and he took care of his brothers. So it seemed that Yosef goes through a series of random events that have no logic. They make no sense. And Yisroel loved Yosef more than all his sons. He loved him more because he was the son of his old age. And he just knew that there was something special, and he saw the leadership in him at that time. So the gift of the robe became the source of the brothers' jealousy. And you have to also understand that it wasn't only jealousy. He was starting to carve a new path. See, Jacob knew that there was going to be this promised exile, that it was something that Abraham had as part of his covenant with God. It's not what he wanted, but it was what God said is going to be. It's not something he looked forward to. But the solution of all of his sons was to stay connected to God and Torah, stay connected and be a shepherd. Being a shepherd, it means you have some time to meditate, and it's calm and it's quiet, and you can tune into God, and that's how they saw what they were meant to do. And Yosef was completely different. They were a little bit afraid that Yosef was going to get everybody off track. And they were afraid that they couldn't rely on him to bring the people further. So part of it was their jealousy, and part of it was like, where is he going? Like, what is he doing? Why is he so out there? And they decided to get rid of him, to kill him. So Reuben prevented this by telling his brothers to put him into a pit. And then Yehuda told them to sell him to a passing caravan. Okay, and then we see the whole story, how all of this is going on with Yosef that was completely unexpected to him and completely unexpected to Yaakov. And the process goes, he was sold into slavery and went into Potiphar's house. And there he was appreciated and given a high position. Now, it's very interesting. The Chumash says this, the Torah says it clearly written out, that in every situation that he was in, God was with him. Everybody could see that God was with him. And Rashi said he always had God's name on his lips. So he was saying, thank God. And the people could see that whatever he did, God was with him and made him succeed. And so in every situation that he went into, when he went down into slavery, or whether it was later, we'll speak about it a little bit, that he would just show up, do the best he could, and have amazing success. So Potiphar, for example, saw that, this person could come in there and manage the whole house and run everything and take over for everybody else who had little jobs, and he was just taking it over. And everything he did was successful. So Potiphar trusted him and said, this is right. I'm going to let him be in charge. And so it was, and he did well. But then Potiphar's wife tried to seduce him. And when he refused her advances, she accused him of attempted rape, and he was sent to prison. Now, he went from being one of the sons of Yaakov, one of the brothers. He gets sent down to Egypt. He gets sold into slavery to Potiphar. Now, Mrs. Potiphar does whatever she does and gets him put into prison. So it seemed like low, 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 low. Remember that concept. You go down to come up. He seemed to have reached his lowest point. But what happened in prison was, again, he just kept showing up. Whatever he did well. And then the prison warden also saw, he knows what he's doing. He seems to be managing things well. So let me give him some jobs. And whatever job he did well. And again, it was clear that God was with him. Now, we're just going through where he went and how it was for him. And then when it seemed he was at the lowest of the lowest place, now remember, he became in charge of all the prisoners. He became in charge of making everything happen. And the warden, it's good for him. He could take it easy because he had someone else as a manager. So surprisingly, 2 fellow prisoners had dreams, and Yosef was sensitive to their discomfort. These were people that were high echelon servants to the Pharaoh, and the Pharaoh was angry at them, put them in jail. And then there's the whole story that we're not going to talk about, the story of what happens with them. But Yosef was sensitive to them. He asked them why they were distressed. Now, it's very interesting. One of the things that we see here is that Yosef didn't sit in a corner and say, why didn't this work out? I was supposed to be with my father. I'm not with my father. What's going on here? And then that happened. And then that happened. That he didn't do that, which takes a tremendous amount of maturity to keep saying, well, right now, God placed me here in this situation. What can I do right now? And he kept showing up. And when he kept showing up, God was with him and made him succeed in everything. So even though in the difficulties, we need to see that God has a plan. God brings people into situations. But we're supposed to say, and what would you like me to do now? What would you like me to do here? What can I do here? How can I show up in this situation to serve you, God? So he had that in his mind. So he wasn't sitting there being sad. He just kept staying in the present, knowing that God is with him. And that's the only way that he could see that these 2 people look distressed. Otherwise, who cares? If you're distressed and you say, oh, it's so sad for me, then you don't see anybody else. But when you see that I'm meant to be here, I don't exactly know why I'm meant to be here. I am here to do something. I don't get exactly what this situation means, but God must have put me here for something. Okay, so I am here and I'm going to do my service right now. Then you're not thinking about yourself so much. And then you are able to see other people. And he could see that these 2 people looked, they weren't happy to be in jail. These were very wealthy, high-level echelon servants of the Pharaoh. I'm sure they lived in beautiful homes and had beautiful lives. Now they were in prison. They weren't happy anyway. But on that day, they were particularly unhappy. And he could see that. He didn't see everybody wrapped into one picture. Okay, you guys know, why would you be happy anyway? No, he could see, I see you every day. I see this is hard for you, fine. But what happened today? And so he was able to say that to them. You look so distressed. What happened today? That means he was able, even in the midst of a test that he did not want to be in, to say, I am here because you placed me here, God. What can I do now? And he stayed in the present. And when he asked them what was the matter, they explained that they had had dreams. And so he said, tell me your dreams. And he was able to explain the dreams to them. This in itself is a fascinating story, how tuned in he was and how he could see. Remember, he also had dreams. And he was able to explain their dreams to them. And then they were prophetic dreams, and it was as he said it would be. And so the cupbearer, the person who poured the wine for the Pharaoh, was released. And Joseph asked him, tell the Pharaoh that I am a person who, I didn't do anything wrong, just like let me out. And what happened was that the cupbearer did not remember Joseph, and he stayed in prison for another 2 years. Now that in itself is very interesting, that the cupbearer didn't remember him, and he stayed in prison for another 2 years. And I just want to mention that there is such a thing as God's timing. Things come about when God wants it to, because everything else is in place for something to come together. So people ask that question a lot of times, like, why did this come now? And what do we need this for? And why isn't it over? And why didn't they this and that? And we don't know the answers to those things. And we have to do our part. But God has a plan of what and when and how, even though we are a lot involved in the how. So we discover that all of this, we will discover, it's not in this Parsha, well, at the end of the Parsha, that all of this was leading to Joseph's elevation to become the viceroy over all of Egypt. At 30 years old, he became the second most powerful man in the world. From the lowest place, he became a hero overnight. And he went through stages of suffering. When he was placed in Egypt, he was 17 years old, all by himself. It's not where he wanted to be. But he just kept realizing that he was in the hands of God, and that whatever he was and wherever the situation was, he was living with God and God's divine providence, that God was with him and that everything that was going on was from God. So whatever he did, he stayed focused and did not get distracted from his divine service. He remained entirely one with God, to the point that he was what's called a chariot for godliness, which means like you're the chariot and God is the driver, and completely dedicated to service. Not only didn't his intense involvement with worldly matters in Egypt weaken his involvement and attachment to God, but he was able to, and we'll see this in the next Parsha, bring a positive influence over Egypt, and he became master over the Egyptians. So Joseph's ability to bring the positive to the exile became a potential for the later generations to handle the future exiles and make them into a positive force. So wherever we go, wherever we have been, we do the best we can to bring positivity and goodness to the place that we're in. And we see how much of a difference that we've made in every place in the world that we've been. And so this has, what Joseph did became an example to all of us. Now, every exile is called Egypt, even though there are a number of different exiles. But once the Jews went into exile, exile is something that means that we're not where we're supposed to be in the Holy Land, doing the service that we're supposed to be doing. And we see that we're still in exile because King David's descendant hasn't come, the temple hasn't been rebuilt, many people are scattered. Even in Israel, there's a lot of people scattered. This is all part of exile. And when Egypt came under Joseph's rule, this set a pattern for the future. Now, where is Yaakov in all this? Yaakov was not waiting for exile. He didn't, he knew that the exile was going to take place. He wasn't waiting for exile. Well, who were going into exile? He wasn't happy about that. That wasn't what he wanted. He was waiting for redemption, for Geula. So he looked forward to getting through and out of exile altogether, but he knew that exile was part of the process. This is very important, that he was able to have the bigger picture. He knew that they were going to go to Egypt. He knew they were going to go into exile, but he wasn't waiting for exile. He was waiting for redemption, but he knew that exile was part of the process. This is not easy for Yaakov. Even though he had prophecy and he knew that the dreams were true, there was uncertainty. How would this work? Was Yosef really alive? Where was he? How would the dreams come true if Yosef was out of the picture? See, Yosef went into exile, and Yaakov knew he was alive and knew that he was going to be part of this exile in Egypt, but he didn't really exactly know where he was and what was going on. And so he was out of his life for a long time. And that was not pleasant for him at all. So there was a lot of uncertainty about where was Yosef and how would he reconnect with Yosef and how would they go into exile in order to serve God there and then be redeemed through Mashiach, through the Messiah. So how would this come about? So we have to, just like now, there's so much uncertainty. That's not what we want. We don't want uncertainty, but it apparently is part of the process of bringing Mashiach. So we need to show up and do our part, whatever that is, to make it work properly. But it seemed like all this uncertainty and suffering was a waste of time. But as we see in the rest of the Parsha, more is taking place. So we see this plot line. We see what's going on. People's lives are being pushed around, messed around, and what is going on? And Yaakov is crying and mourning for his son. Where is he? Where is he? How's this all going to work out? Even though he knew somehow that he is alive, his dreams are going to come true. I guess he's in Egypt preparing for, somehow he's part of this exile that has to happen. I don't know what's going on. And that's very uncomfortable, not to know how it's going to work out and what's going on. But what was really going on? The Medrash, Parshas in Bereshit Rabbah says, the tribes were busy with the sale of Yosef. Yosef was busy. Reuven was busy. Yaakov was busy. Yehuda was busy. And the Holy One, blessed be he, was busy creating the light of Mashiach, of the Messiah. So God is putting this whole thing together to bring Mashiach, to bring the redemption. And each of these were players in a picture that had no idea that God was moving them forward in the way that he wanted. So each of these people had their individual concerns, while actually the inner dimension of the activities with which each of them was involved was part of crafting the light of the Mashiach. So the purpose of all of this was unclear to all the people involved. So we need to understand that what we see around us is the outer experience, not God's larger perspective. There's no random, there's no coincidence. Everything is part of God's plan, and the steps of divine providence lead people forward, even through extreme drama. So God is doing something and leading people forward. So we need to know that in this parsha, which is so difficult and so unclear with so much drama, God's plan was in action. Yosef had his dreams, and through this, the process began. So Yaakov's, what it says, awaiting and looking forward to Yosef's reigning, as the dreams had shown, was setting up the exile which would bring God's plan into action and eventually lead to bringing them into Egypt and then God's taking them out of Egypt and ultimately bringing the people completely out of exile. So all this that's going on that we don't understand what this is and we don't like what this is part of God's larger plan bringing us to redemption. And we need to keep that in mind. So Yaakov's awareness that God had a larger plan was part of supporting and bringing that plan further. And we all need to know that whatever situation we're in, God has a larger plan. And we want to be conscious to do our part in the situation that we're in. So let's see some of the people who are moved in this Parsha and what happens. Reuven, Yaakov's oldest son, was busy doing tshuva. Tshuva is English translation, repentance. He was trying to fix what he had done wrong, and it wasn't the hugest thing, but it was inappropriately disrespectful to his father. And he felt very bad about that. So he kept trying to fix himself for having been disrespectful. So Reuven had good intentions. Remember, Reuven was the one that said, don't kill him, throw him into a pit. So he saved his life, but then he went away to meditate and pray. And he had good intentions, but he didn't really help anyone. He was a good person, but not the role model for his brothers, because he could have said, I'm the oldest brother, don't kill him. That's it. We're just not doing that. I understand everybody is angry at him, but we're not doing that. That's what he could have done if he would have been an appropriate leader, but he didn't do that. He started it, but he didn't finish it, which shows the importance of finishing what is ours to do. So what happened was God was showing here he's not the right role model for leadership. And because he was the oldest son, he would have become the leader, and God took that leadership away from him. And he became, of course, one of the tribes, but not the leader. And his leadership instead was transferred to the tribe of Yehuda, from which Moshe comes. So how did Yehuda merit that he should become the leader? So we see in the story, when the other sons of Yaakov plotted to kill Yosef, Yehuda saved his life. He's the one that said, what shall we profit by killing our brother and covering his blood? Let's sell him to the Ishmaelites, because a caravan was coming, and not harm him with our own hands, because he is our brother, our own flesh. Now, the truth is, the brothers would have listened to whatever Yehuda said, because Yehuda really was a leader, but it was not known yet, even to himself. And we're going to see what makes him a leader, because that takes place in this parsha also. But they accepted his reasoning, and Yosef was taken out of the snake-infested pit in which he had been thrown, and he was sold into slavery. But the brothers, after they see how Yaakov is so brokenhearted, they lose respect for Yehuda. Because if Yehuda would have said, well, come on, guys, we don't like him, but we don't have to kill him. That's ridiculous. And we don't have to sell him into slavery either. Let's just get over it. Or tell him, you better change your ways. Something. He could have stopped this whole story. And so his brothers lose respect for him, and Yehuda moves away to another place. Now, Yehuda was the first Baal Tshuva in the Torah, the first person who really, really repents for his sins and changes his ways. So what happens where he moves? He gets married, he has 3 sons, and Tamar had married his oldest son, who wasn't such a wonderful person, and God said, enough of you. And then he married the second son, who wasn't so great either. So God said, enough of you too. And so Yehuda had a third son, and he said, he's young, but I will send him to you and you'll marry him. But he was afraid that that son would also die. And so he didn't send the third son to her. And that left her a childless widow, unable to remarry and have children, because according to the law, that brother could have had a child named after his own brother and in a certain way continue the brother's line. But Yehu didn't want to do that. So there she was by herself. And Tamar knows that she has to have, see, there's a lot of, I don't know if the word is sometimes prophecy, and sometimes the word is Ruach HaKodesh, which means godly spirit, where a person feels clearly that something is meant for them or something is right for them. And people have that, where they sense what is right for them. And Tamar knew that she must have a child from the line of Yehuda. And she does what she must, because she also lives with a consciousness that taps into her part in God's plan. So you have to say, what is my part in God's plan? Once she understands her situation, Tamar disguises herself as a prostitute. She figures out she has to have this child from Yehuda somehow or another. So she disguises herself as a prostitute, and Judah sleeps with her. It's very actually interesting. There's a commentary that says he wasn't the type, even though his wife had passed away, he wasn't the type of person to go to a prostitute, but it says God pushed him there. And he sees this woman sitting at the corner of the road, with her face covered, and he had no idea who it was. And he was pushed in a certain way to sleep with her because, again, that's God's plan. And she becomes pregnant. So Yehuda was unaware of her disguise. And he tells her that he's going to give her a sheep as the price, but he doesn't have a sheep on him right now. So she says, okay, so give me your seal, your cord, and your staff. Those are things that you use. Give me those things, and then you can send me the sheep, and then I could give those back to you. So, okay. And then later he sends his friend to bring the sheep, and there's nobody there. And he asks somebody, where's the prostitute that sat over here? That's in this Parsha. There was no Parsha. We don't have a prostitute who sits here. So his friend comes back and says, there's nobody there. And he says, okay, there's nothing we could do. I was willing to give her the sheep. So we'll just leave it at that. So then the word came out that she was pregnant. And so he concluded that she must have had a forbidden relationship and she should be punished because he was a judge, and that she should be punished. At this point, Tamar is going to come out and they're going to say what the punishment should be. She took the Yehuda's seal, cord, and staff, and she sends them to Yehuda with a message. The father of my child is the man to whom these belong. She didn't say in public, who do you think you are judging me? She didn't say any of that. She's going to leave it to him. She's very modest. And she sent him these things that were his with that message. And now suddenly Yehuda understood the whole story. Not only had he placed Tamar in an impossible situation of living widowhood, and not only is he the father of her child, but he realizes that she has behaved in a really extraordinary way, being very discreet in telling him the truth without shaming him. So he realizes he had done the wrong thing regarding not saving Yosef. He had not been honest with Tamar in not giving Tamar the son that he had promised. But what happens is, that's really interesting, is that Yehuda admits the truth. And he says in front of everyone, the judges, the people who were there, she is more righteous than I. And this was the first time in the Torah that someone acknowledges his own guilt. And this becomes the turning point in Yehuda's life. So all of this drama with Yehuda and moving away and having the 3 sons and Tamar, all of this, and then her now expecting his child, all of this is something that makes him realize that he has to be straight and he has to say it like it is. And actually the word Yehuda is a word that comes from lahodot, which has to do with acknowledging. And his job is to acknowledge. And so we see that a leader needs to acknowledge the truth and say it like it is. And that changes his life. And that makes him suitable to be a leader. Rabbi Abahu said, in the place where Balei Tshuva, where people who are penitents stand, even the perfectly righteous can't stand. And Yehuda becomes a Baal Tshuva. So Yosef is always known as the righteous one, and Yehuda becomes the one who does tshuva, who repents, and when he does something wrong, he acknowledges it and changes his way, and that makes him a leader. So each one is a different kind of leader. In this story, Yosef becomes second to the king. Yehuda, however, becomes the father of Israel's kings. His descendants are David, King Solomon, and will be the Messiah. As great as an individual can be because of his or her natural character, still greater is a person who's capable of growth and change. And this is the power of tshuva, and it began with Yehuda. It's very important for every one of us to be able to grow and change and work on ourselves. And the way that we do that is by acknowledging our truth. Acknowledging the truth. What can I change? What can I do? Where can I step up? And where is it something that I have to step up in a different way? Because that's my truth. That's what God wants from me. So God has worked on his plan of preparing for Mashiach. God moved Yosef to Egypt, prepared for the promised exile that would lead to the people receiving the Torah at Mount Sinai, moved Reuben away from being the leader of the tribes, moved Yehuda to being the leader, the father of kings, and his son from Tamar to become the ancestor of Mashiach. The reason that she needed to have that child was because that child would become an ancestor of King David, King Solomon, and the Messiah. So later on, when hunger forced Yaakov and his sons to descend to Egypt, where Yosef served as the viceroy, this became the prophesied beginning of the exile. So the purpose of exile is to propel the nation to a far superior level to that was attained before the exile. God is bringing our people up to the level of true living with Mashiach, which is something each of us has. We work on it as a people, but each of us individually has to work on that. So at the time of the final redemption, the Jewish people will be on an even higher level than they were when the Holy Temple existed. And all this gives us a lesson in terms of our own spiritual service. When we look at the state of the planet, each day looks spiritually darker than the one before. A person could despair over having the strength to illuminate the world with the light of Torah and mitzvahs. But all spiritual descents are states of darkness and concealment. They're only external manifestations because the inner truth is quite different. God has a plan. People often get caught up with their problems, real or imagined. And sometimes we worry about problems and we blow them out of all proportions. And even if the problems are genuine, we can't allow them to take over our lives. So Yosef had real problems. He had been taken from his family. He was imprisoned with no hope of being set free. And yet he was able to look beyond his own difficulties and give other people hope and strength. And what gave Yosef the ability to focus on others was his awareness and his trust that everything that happened to him came from God. And Yosef maintained an ongoing awareness that whatever was going on was something that God wanted. And he was able to keep his inner strength and hope. So nothing that God does is for the bad. On the contrary, God's intent is always for the good, and ultimately that positive intent will be manifested in our lives as well. So Yosef's trust in God was real, not just a spiritual belief. And because it was real, it gave him the power to experience inner peace and happiness and share that with others. So we need to know that everything that takes place in the world is a fulfillment of God's benevolent will. Now, we also have to know that we live with paradox. That's what we're really talking about, that there's an outside and an inside. So when a situation comes about, we don't want that outside. We don't want that turn of events. That's not what we wanted. At the same time, we have to ask ourselves, what can I do? God is good and has a purpose. What can I do to make a difference? What is my place in this? And that doesn't mean we like the way it's working out, but on a certain level, we're saying that God is working something out in a way we can't understand. So despite appearances, looks like it's going down the tubes, but the world in each day is ascending in holiness, going up and becoming more refined until it becomes a fit dwelling place for God. So all these things are coming from above, and they're intended to bring the world to its ultimate fulfillment. And exile is part of our elevation. The primary purpose of the exile is to bring about this future redemption, as Yaakov understood when Yosef first had his dreams. So what's the attitude that we learn from both Yaakov and Yosef and from Yehuda? When a person is experiencing obstacles in his observance of the Torah and its mitzvahs, instead of diving into his feelings and fears, he should realize that the elimination of these challenges is dependent on him and his conduct. If he has absolute trust in God, that God will help him so the situation will be good, then he is completely calm without any worry, and he knows that his trust will bear fruit. So we can't just stand there being trusting. The trust, we have to be trusting. At the same time, we have to do whatever we can to remove the obstacles, get rid of the obstacles. But it's the trust that changes the situation. And similarly, on the national scale, we need to know, it says, in terms of redemption from Egypt, in the merit of their trust in God, the Jews were redeemed from Egypt. So we have to keep that trust. Also, with regard the redemption from our present exile, our sages says, the Jews are worthy of redemption and reward for their hope of redemption alone. The hope by itself makes us worthy. So we have to trust the promise, my deliverance is soon to come, and that all this is a catalyst. So Jacob's desire for tranquility was to have this ultimate fusion of the soul and the body. But the time we're in the process, and the time at that time, which is coming soon, it says there will be neither famine nor war, neither envy nor competition, because good things will flow in abundance, and all the delights will be freely available like dust. So there will be absolute harmony. And then Jacob and all of his descendants will experience the tranquility they wanted. So even with all this, Yaakov understood that this was for the good. That didn't mean it was easy for him. And he suffered. And Joseph suffered certainly, but he kept reminding himself that all of this is for God, from God, for a higher purpose. And if this is where God wants me to be. So it's interesting that sometimes there is pain and sometimes there is suffering. And pain can be real, but how not to like drag it into every aspect of life, which is a kind of suffering, so that you can't do anything else. And we see how Joseph didn't do that. Yeah, there was pain, but not suffering, because he kept saying, I mean, how do you think he felt? You know, his brother sold him into slavery. He wants his father. He's a kid. But he knows that God placed him here and he needs to show up. So that's what it really is about. Mashiach is being revealed. And we need to know that the outer darkness and concealment is only external. And the inner truth is that God's plan is always in action, good and all powerful. So we have to trust that God is in charge and doing good for us, and that we will see this good. But our focus is up to us. We can dive into the exterior drama with our feelings, and we need to take care of what's going on in the exterior situation. Or we can do what we can and trust that God will help us through. So not dive into the drama, but say, what can I do in this situation? And we can open our eyes and see that the time has come and focus on the good and the true that is God's plan coming into fruition. And that trust, when we focus this way, makes us true partners with God in his plan. So where is our focus? On God and his good, and on what we can do that is good. And as much as possible, we have to have joy, because that joy and that trust brings people up, brings us up and brings people up. And the people that are involved in the drama and the difficulties at this time are asking for us to have trust and to trust in God and to pray and do our part with the big picture in mind. So may it be so. I just want to say a couple of words about that. Parsha Vayeishev is read during the week that the festival of Hanukkah begins. And Hanukkah is going to begin in just couple of days. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, taught that symbolically, each of us is a candle that is yearning to be kindled. And the candle's wax is analogous to the body, and the wick symbolizes the soul. And neither the fuel or the wick, the body or the soul, can serve any positive function unless it's joined with the other. That the wick and that the candle with its wick and the flame needs to come together. So we need to know that each of us has a small jug of oil. Remember that when the Maccabees fought the war against the Syrian Hasmoneans, who wanted to take over the world. And they could say anybody can think whatever they want. You believe in one God that's beyond the mind, one God that is beyond the obvious? Oh no, that doesn't work. And they tried to destroy the Jews spiritually, physically also, because they wanted to prevent the Jews from living as Jews live. And so they did what they could to destroy the temple, and we needed the oil for the menorah. And the menorah with the seal of the high priest means that oil is dedicated completely to God, and it's pure. It's the first drops of oil. Remember, we said at the beginning that the olives need to be squeezed to get that first drop of oil, pure oil. But each of us has a small jug of oil buried deep within, really the essence of the soul, bearing the seal of the high priest, the connection to God. And the Syrian Greeks or any oppressor can never access that, because the essence of our soul is connected into God, and no one and nothing can touch it. This is our Jewish inner soul, and we need to go and get that and light it up. And that's why after re-entering the Holy Temple following the war with the Syrian Greeks, the Jews insisted on looking for oils bearing the seal of the high priest, and the Syrians had destroyed all the oil that they could, but there was one little jug of oil that, as we know, they found that with a seal on it, and that lasted miraculously for 8 days, until after that they were able to make new oil. So we can debate whether the miracle of Hanukkah centered on the war between the clashing Jews and Hellenistic values and armies, or whether it focused on the small jug of oil burning exceedingly longer than expected. And maybe the greatest miracle in the story is that during the darkest hour of the darkest month in the Jewish calendar, we have had the courage year after year to set that oil alight and brighten up the world around us. And when all seems dark and lost, and when our enemies who value darkness and the opposite of life, when they attack, and we're talking about enemies both external and internal, when they attack our personal temple and desecrate our Holy of Holies, Hanukkah empowers us to stand up and dispel the darkness with light. So no matter how bleak reality may seem, darkness cannot exist alongside light. Even just the tiniest of flames lights things up. So each of us, without exception, has the strength buried within us to ignite that spark. So we need to be the light we want to see in the world. Be the light we want to see in the world, igniting our own souls and inspiring others to kindle theirs as well. So where we are in this situation, whatever situation we're in, we have to light ourselves up. And we have to ask ourselves, and each of us, how many times do we have aspirations we keep dormant because we convince ourselves that we won't succeed? How many times do we give up on our dreams before even beginning to work on them? And we can't pass up opportunities because we believe others will shine brighter or burn longer. We each have a light within us for which the world has been waiting for so many years. And we have to know that each of us is unique and individual and partners with God. And when God gives us abilities to stand up and fight, or abilities to stand up and light, that we need to light the menorah, light up who we are, and do what we are here to do. And now is our time to shine. So may everyone have a happy Hanukkah. May we be blessed to do what we're here to do. And may we see that God's plan is always with us, and do our part with joy and with success. And may we see the end to the exile, and may we live with light and joy and plenty and all good for us and for all the people of the world. Be blessed.